We have a wonderful panel of speakers tonight who'll go through the Energy Charter Treaty just in terms of different points and elements of it. I'm just going to give you a very rough intro into it, just that it's for those of you who might not know, it's a multilateral investment treaty that's specific to the energy sector, and it was negotiated in the 90s on the back, I suppose, of the post-Cold War, but also coinciding with an EU push to liberalise the energy market. And while originally designed for a fossil fuel world, the provisions continue to cover all forms of energy and new technologies. And it's also an old school investment treaty. So it has the investor protection mechanisms that people might be familiar with, known as ISDS, but they're the very old style ISDS that's involved in the Energy Charter Treaty. And we'll look at those in a little bit more detail with some of the other speakers. It's also, for those of you interested from an Irish perspective, it's the only treaty that Ireland is signed up to that has ISDS mechanisms. And while we're still having the issue around CETA, Ireland is a party to this. It is exposed to the full provisions of the ISDS, and there's rumours why we've never been taken to, or that we know of, because these things happen behind closed doors, so that we've been taken to court. There's certainly a lot of evidence there to show that Ireland has at least been threatened with legal action, both in the Corrib gas field, but also around the smoky coal ban. And we might have a look at that around how that causes regulatory chill. But that's sort of the background to the Energy Charter Treaty, what it is. But we're going to look now at going through our speakers. So our first speaker is Dr. Yamina Saheb, who's a former staff member of the Energy Charter Treaty Secretariat and one of the lead author with the IPCC, and has authored a lot of research on the Energy Charter Treaty and its impacts on climate change. And Dr. Yamina will, I suppose, look at how the Energy Charter Treaty is not Paris compliant, or it's not, what would you say, it doesn't tally well with the Paris Agreement and our targets. We'll then go to Dr. Aideen O'Doherty, who's Assistant Professor in Accounting at DCU and Coordinator with the Not Here, Not Anywhere campaign. And we'll look at, I suppose, where Ireland is exposed, particularly with the talk now of new fossil fuel infrastructure coming into Ireland. And then we will move to Cecilia Olivet, who's the trade advisor with the Left political group in the European Parliament, and we'll look at where the modernisation, because the Energy Charter Treaty is supposed to be going under reform because people have recognised its dangers, but whether that reform actually goes far enough. And then our final speaker tonight will be Faith Lumanua, and she's a researcher and campaigner with Akina Mama Wa Africa, and she will look at the proposals that are currently in the ether as well of expanding the Energy Charter Treaty into the oil and gas rich global south. So that's our panel of speakers. As you can see, it's an excellent panel. I hope you'll stay with us for the course of the evening, and if you have questions, to put them into the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But I'm going to hand you over first of all to Dr. Yamina Saheb.
Yes, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to explain today, which is the day the IPCC mitigation report has been launched, why the Energy Charter Treaty is not Paris compatible and cannot be made Paris compatible. And I think the fact that it cannot be made Paris compatible is as important, or maybe even more important, than the fact that it is not. It is already the fact that it's not Paris compatible. The main reason for that is that the Energy Charter Treaty protects investment in fossil fuels in the energy sector without distinguishing between different energy sources. So it protects all kinds of investment in the energy supply, no matter if they are harmful for the environment or not. So that's the main reason. And today we are modernization process of the ECT has been launched in 2020. Unfortunately, none of the contracting parties has proposed to fully phase out the protection of fossil fuels. The European Union proposed, the European Commission proposed on behalf of the member states to phase out the protection of new, to stop protecting, to not protect anymore new investments in fossil fuels by 20, for all fossil fuels right now, but for power plants, gas power plants, it's until 2040. It could go until 2040 for new gas power plants. However, the European Commission did not propose to exclude, to end the protection of existing investment, and existing investment in fossil fuels will continue to be protected until 2040, based on this proposal. This is the only proposal known which discusses what to do with fossil fuels under the Energy Charter Treaty. This proposal has not been accepted by other contracting parties because some of other contracting parties either make income out of fossil fuels or they are investors in, they have plenty of investors, they are investing outside their countries. This is the case of Japan in fossil fuels, for example, in coal power plants. And when this proposal has been rejected, so they started working on what they call flexibility mechanism. In this flexibility mechanism, each party will phase out fossil fuel whenever they would like to. If this flexibility mechanism is adopted, which is not yet the case, it's not, it has not been agreed yet. So this means for the European Union and for Ireland that fossil fuels, existing investment in fossil fuels will be protected until 2040, based on this flexibility mechanism. So at the same time, you have the IPCC report launched today, which says that emissions from fossil fuels emissions should peak by 2025. 2025 is today, is already tomorrow, you see? So this means that by continuing the protection of existing investment in fossil fuels, if we stop, if, for example, Ireland decides to stop running fossil fuels installations, so Ireland will be sued for that. So basically, you cannot implement the climate law and whatever climate policy is, except if your climate policy is about continuing with fossil fuels. And in this case, it's greenwashing climate policy. That's the only type of climate policy you could implement if the ECT, if the flexibility mechanism is adopted. And that's why we are in a very bad situation. I don't know what you could do from the Irish side to put pressure to maybe join the club of countries, because there are a group of countries asking to ask the Commission. France was the first country to do that, and it was followed by Spain, Poland, Greece, and other countries. I am not sure that Ireland has joined this group, but it will be good for you to join this group and to ask to work on the withdrawal from the ECT. Why the withdrawal is the only option? Because by withdrawing, we can cancel between ourselves the sunset clause, and we can protect, we can start working seriously on our climate policies, which is not the case today. We cannot do it. I hope this answers your question, gives you an overview of something that is quite complex.
No, absolutely, and we'll tease out that recommendation around other countries that are calling for it. Unfortunately, to date, in any responses to the questions we've put to the minister is that they're continuing with the reform process and will review that decision. So they're not agreeing to sign up to the block at the moment, but maybe after today's IPCC report, which refers to the Energy Charter Treaty, that might change. But thank you, Yamina, and I hope you can stay with us.
Sorry, one last point. So this IPCC report makes a reference to the Energy Charter Treaty as a treaty that hinders the design of climate policies. So it's very important that it has never been mentioned before. And it also makes a reference to a more general reference in the summary for policymakers about the trade agreement, that trade agreement could hinder climate action. But in chapter 14, specific reference is made to the Energy Charter Treaty. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamina. And I'm going to move straight to our second speaker now. That's Dr. Aideen O'Doherty from Not Here, Not Anywhere.
Thanks, Lynn, and thank you for organising. Thank you to you and your team, and for the invite to us to speak. We're delighted to be here. So as Lynn said, so I'm 18. I am a member of a climate campaign group called Not Here, Not Anywhere, and we campaign on no new fossil fuel exploration or infrastructure in Ireland or anywhere. And I'm going to talk about, I suppose, Ireland's potential, current and potential exposure in relation to fossil fuels under the Energy Charter Treaty, and the potential of being sued under the ISDS mechanism. So we have, so our big campaign in the past was working on no new licenses for offshore drilling for oil and gas off the Irish coast, and that's a campaign that just sort of well, concluded, if you like, recently with a law being passed to stop offshore drilling. We noticed at the time, one of the arguments, so it was a long campaign, it was a long sort of battle with the government at the time, trying to get them to implement this ban on new licenses. And one of the issues that was brought up at the time was this, and Lynn was talking about this regulatory chill, excuse me, about the regulatory chill. And people were saying, so the minister at the time was Sean Canny, he was Minister for Natural Resources, and he was saying that we can't ban new licenses because then we could be exposed to legal proceedings under European law. So we've already experienced how this has kind of affected campaigns and affected, made the government nervous about introducing laws to stop new fossil fuel exploration. What we're working on now, and I suppose the major threats now relate to new fossil fuel infrastructure in Ireland. So obviously we know from what Yamina was saying from the IPCC report today, from the increasing sort of volume of research and sentiment that's telling us that we have to get out of fossil fuels fast. We can't afford any more new fossil fuel infrastructure. The situation in Ireland at the moment is I suppose the biggest threat is liquefied natural gas terminals, which Not Here, Not Anywhere has been campaigning on for the past few years. There are currently 4 of them proposed for Ireland. The one that's most advanced is Shannon LNG in Tarbert in County Kerry, and that's a US company called New Fortress Energy, which has applied to put a floating liquefied natural gas terminal there, and alongside it, I suppose it would be feeding up to 8 data centers, which they've proposed for beside the terminal. And then an Irish company called Predator LNG has also proposed 3 terminals in Cork, Mayo, and Louth. So the stages, I suppose, the legal stages these terminals are at. So the Shannon terminal, there is an active planning application for it. An Bord Pleanála was due to give the decision on this in March, but it's since put off the decision to September. So actually something that I found, or what we found, isn't quite clear under the Energy Charter Treaty is a planning application enough for the government to be sued? Could New Fortress Energy, US company, sue the government if even if they hadn't been granted the planning application? So that's his potential exposure there. And also with the company who's Predator LNG, who's planning to build in Cork, Mayo, and Louth. In Cork, they are currently applying to, or they've submitted to the Department or the Department of Environment, Climate. They've submitted a sort of not an official application, but they are keen to take over the infrastructure around the old Kinsale gas infrastructure down in Cork. So there's the potential, so things are in motion where companies could be sort of, I suppose, made certain promises, whether it's in the form of a planning application or even permission to apply for an application, that could then expose us with the LNG terminals. So they're a major immediate threat. And also, there are new gas plants planned for Ireland as well. So the latest figure I've heard is 9 new gas plants planned for Ireland. Again, a lot of this expansion is driven by the increase in energy demand from data centres. And obviously there are now concerns around energy security as well, which makes it harder to make that argument against the fossil fuel infrastructure. One thing that that could be relevant in the case of Ireland is that the European Court of Justice recently ruled that EU, and I'd be interested to hear the other panelists' views on this, that EU companies can't use the ECT mechanism to sue other EU countries. Now that's something I want to, I'd like the panel to kind of jump in on the latest on that. So a lot of the domestic gas plants, they're Irish companies, and Predator LNG is an Irish company as well, so that might dilute the threat slightly there, hopefully. But obviously the Shannon LNG terminal, the big one that's planned, is an American company. So I think that is that's most of what I wanted to say, except the final thing is that obviously with these the threat of these LNG terminals being potentially granted planning permission, and then exposing us to ISDS under the ECT, and making it more difficult to get out of, or to stop them being built. We really need to sort of pull the plug now and get legislation in now. And I'll put a link to Not Here Not Anywhere has an LNG free campaign to pass legislation to ban the development of LNG terminals, and I'll put that in the chat now. It's lngfree.ie, and we have a petition and various actions that you can take now to stop LNG terminals happening in Ireland.
Brilliant. Thanks a million for that, Aideen. And I'm not sure if Cecilia might come in on the intra-EU, because one of the problems with the ISDS is that European law is a separate case law, and effectively all of the tribunals have been ignoring to date any applications which are saying this is an intra-EU dispute, so we need to resolve it at the European Court of Justice. It also doesn't address our problem with basically if you're owned by multiple investors. So because this is a very old ISDS model, the brass plate company can apply, but also you're now seeing both British companies and Swiss companies setting themselves up and going, we're outside of the EU, hey, just set up a company over here. But Cecilia might go into that in a little bit more detail, but just also on the gas plants and the LNG, we have put in like PQs and addressed the CRU both at the committee and said, look, are you at least considering Ireland's exposure when you're talking about bringing in this new fossil fuel infrastructure? And to date, it isn't being considered, and that's what's really concerning. And sort of, I suppose, one of the reasons why we're hosting this meeting is to just make people aware that Ireland seems to be going blind into bringing in new fossil fuel infrastructure. But I'm going to hand you now over to Cecilia Olivet, who, as I said, is a researcher with the Left group in the European Parliament, and particularly looks at trade policy at an EU level.
Thanks, Lynn, and thank you so much for the invitation. So, I mean, I will try to cover, go a little bit to this modernization process. So we've heard how dangerous this treaty is, how old it is. There was a general agreement that it needed to be modernized, only because there was a strong push also from the public, but eventually the European member states and the Commission agreed that this was an outdated treaty, not compatible with Paris Agreement, and this modernization process started. But let's see if it really leads us where we want to go, or where we need to go. Next, please, Ryan. So just to say, there's been already 11 rounds of negotiations, and there is an intention to conclude this process by June 2022. And this whole process, since it started, has been, I would say, covered in a severe lack of transparency. There's been no documents available on the negotiation text. There's just some minor reports of after each negotiation round, but very, very basic with no real details. There's been no consultations, real consultations, public consultations at national level. And this deadline of June will not also allow for any meaningful consultation with whatever is agreed, let's say, before it. So that's pretty worrying. I was already mentioning that some EU countries have already come out saying if there is no real meaningful reform, exit is the solution. So far, France has led this process, but also Spain, Poland, Greece, Latvia, Hungary, and Cyprus have adopted this type of position. But again, they are all saying we have to give the negotiation a chance. So we are all leading towards this moment now of June to really see if what's on the table, can count as meaningful reform and can be accepted in the current context, especially with the IPCC reports and what we know that fossil fuel needs to be stopping much earlier than what some of the proposals on the table are. And I just want to also mention, because in the presentations at the beginning, it's difficult to cover it all in such a short space of time, but we're not talking here about hypotheticals. Fossil fuel investors are already suing governments for taking climate action. They're already being suing for millions and billions of euros. So this is why this treaty is so dangerous and controversial, because not only it's already been used by fossil fuel investors to challenge climate action, but also because we are talking millions and billions of euros. This is not little money. So we are paying, fossil fuel companies for, also investments that were doomed from the start in some cases. Like, we know that companies like Uniper suing the Netherlands for the decision to ban the use of coal for electricity by 2030, or Rockhopper suing Italy for stopping the drilling of oil in the sea. And these lawsuits, against the Netherlands, we're talking 1 billion euros, against Italy, 400 million euros. And these are not monies always that have been invested by the companies. They, for example, in the case of Rockhopper, the company only invested 50 million, but they're claiming expected future profits. So it's not just the sunk cost that they can claim, but also what they expect to win in the future. And this goes 20, 30 years down the line. So sorry, this deviates a little bit from the modernization process, but I just felt like giving some concrete examples, shows the realness of it all. And we are not talking in the air of this treaty. So just quickly going to the next one. Why? Next, Brian, please. Thanks. I don't know if we can move. Oh yeah. So from my point of view, shared by clearly what Yamina also was mentioning at the beginning, I would say, most of civil society that are working on this issue and experts working on this issue, the current proposals on the table will not make this agreement Paris compatible or European Green Deal compatible. If anything, might even make it worse. So first and foremost, there were two main objectives that the European Union put themselves when they started this modernization. The first one was to bring this treaty in line with the European climate ambitions. This is clearly not happening. What the EU put on the table originally was already a very weak proposal. As Yamina was saying, protection of fossil fuels will continue until the mid-30s for existing investment, until 2040 for new investments in certain gas infrastructure projects. This was already very, very weak, but this was even rejected by the majority of the members of the ECT. And you need unanimity, you need consensus to reach an agreement, of reform. So they also know that if they don't have any agreement, they will have to get out. There's no other way. So it's now on the table, it's what it's called the flexibility proposal that Yamina mentioned, which means that member states will stop this protection under these terms that the Commission put forward, but all the other ECT members would maintain all the protection for fossil fuels indefinitely. They won't have to change anything. So this is sort of an ugly compromise that it seems there are different reports on whether this was already agreed by everyone or not. In the parliament 2 weeks ago, BP Dombrovskis said that yes, this was already an agreement of all the members, but later we heard reports that that has not been the case and some members haven't yet agreed to this. But even if this proposal is agreed, it's clearly not enough by any, looking at the science, looking at what climate scientists are saying. So this is one key aspect, but there is another key aspect. So if we go to the next slide, which is the issue that also the EU wanted to bring the ECT in line with the new investment protection model. So get rid of the old style ISDS. This is what Malmström had already promised many, many years ago, and what they are in a way doing with the new negotiations. But in the negotiations, in the modernization process of the ECT, ISDS is not even on the table. There's no chance to even reform it because it's not on the table. The other countries have refused to put it under negotiation. So basically, in no scenario, this will be changed. Which means we will have a treaty, even if it's modernized, that still maintains ISDS in its old style. And this, also lawyers are saying makes it incompatible with the current European legislation, particularly the opinion of the European Court of Justice 170. So these, I would say, are the two main issues. Next one, just to conclude. So easy to reform, not going to end the protection of fossil fuels. It might end it in the long term for member states, not for the rest. Will maintain old style ISDS. A meaningful reform is clearly not possible. So in our view, the only sensible option is to exit, and to exit now, either in a coordinated way, that would be the ideal. But if not, we have the example of Italy that has withdrawn from the ECT couple of years ago, so countries can also do it on their own. And this is allowed within the treaty. There is a clause in this treaty that allows governments to leave. So this is not illegal. The only problem is that there is this famous sunset clause, which means, it's one of these, what we find in all the investment treaties. That's why we call them zombie treaties sometimes, because even if you kill them, they will continue living on for a number of years, and in this case it's 20 years, so it's a very long period, unfortunately. But this only applies for new investments, so for the investments that were already there. So this is still something to take into account. So for example, Italy left in 2016. All investments that were present in Italy by 2016 are still covered, but the new investments are not covered. So there's still an advantage in that sense of leaving this treaty. So I will leave it there. I don't know. Just these options that we were talking about and that Amina already mentioned. So coordinated exit, and then you can have an agreement between all the member states that the sunset clause will not apply, or individual exits. So those would be the ways forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cecilia. And I'm sure maybe in some of the questions we can tease out those options of, even though Italy left in 2016 and are still protecting the existing investors, they're 5 years into the sunset clause while we're still negotiating reform of something that might not be Paris compliant or isn't Paris compliant. But we can tease that out in the questions. The next speaker is Faith. And I think it'll be really interesting now, because even just talking about the fact that the EU and the intra-EU trying to negotiate that between European countries, there won't be any ISDS, and they're trying to fight that carve out. At the same time, EU countries don't seem to have, or EU governments don't seem to have a problem with expanding the ISDS protections into the global south. And what are the implications then in terms of climate action? So Faith Lumandwe is going to just talk us through those expansion proposals under the Energy Charter Treaty. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Faith. if we have faith.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn. So I am going to switch off my camera. I just thought that maybe I would switch it on so that people can see me. But for purposes of having a stable network, I think I should switch off my video. Yeah, so thank you very much once again for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I am Faith Lumonia, as Lynn has indicated, and I work with Akina Mama Africa under the Economic Justice and Climate Action Program as the program officer. And to basically start off my submission, I just wanted us to acknowledge one thing, that investment protection agreements were created to protect the status quo, and that the Paris Agreement, however, requires radical change. And so that is why at Akina Mama Africa, our approach to climate action centers climate justice, and we recognize that the climate crisis has resulted from certain systems and structures that have been put in place for a long time, systems and structures that have allowed for capitalists to be able to reap from the system. And we know how that capitalists are individuals to whom social justice basically remains alien, because for them it's really about extracting and exploiting, and nothing really to do with ensuring social justice or sustainable development. And I think for me to reflect on the expansion process is to also think about our history, and recognizing that some of the challenges that we face today, whether it's in terms of the shrinking policy space, is because of colonialism, and the fact that it has continued to influence and inform the ways in which we engage, particularly with the global north. The expansion process is more or less a replay of what happened during the Berlin Conference, when there was discussions around the scramble for Africa. And now it's clear that there are changes that are happening within the global north. There are stronger restrictions when it comes to, for instance, investment in fossil fuels and the entire fossil fuels markets. And I think it was a research that was done by SOMO that actually revealed that doing business in the fossil industry, particularly in Netherlands and a lot of the European countries, is getting more and more expensive. And so it's no wonder that there is now a need for expansion. Also, so that these corporations, global north corporations, can be able to access resources, cheaper resources, but also because of the influence that these countries already have over our governments, and the coloniality that continues to be infused in the ways in which we relate with the global north, has then continued to inform certain decisions such as these. So the fact that corporations are able to come to the African continent and do as they please, and even when restrictions are implemented against them, they have the liberty to sue through bilateral investment treaties, also reveals the proposal now to expand. And just to talk about the expansion a little more, is to also recognize that indeed this expansion process has been on, although we do not have countries that have actually acceded completed the process of accession. We know that there are countries like Burundi, like Eswatini, like Mauritania, that are in the final stages. We also know that there are a number of countries, but also regional economic blocs that have been approach to begin their accession process into this particular treaty. We know the role that the Energy Charter Treaty Commission is also increasingly playing in investing and supporting different countries to be able to accede, whether it's in terms of developing their different reports that they need to put together. We know, for instance, from the East African Community perspective, that the Secretariat has already been engaged to not only accede as the region, but also get the different partner states to do so. And I think for me, one of the things that is clear is that the ECT is a problematic framework because it undermines environmental protection and climate action. And I know that Cecilia and the rest of the speakers have been able to share about how this happens with the investor-state dispute settlement system, but also we know that it undermines democracy. And for me, having worked with around the Energy Charter Treaty at a time when the government of Uganda took the decision to express their intention to accede to the Energy Charter Treaty without consulting stakeholders, despite the immense implications that come with being party to this, revealed the extent to which there is no recognition and respect of democracy and ensuring that people actually consulted. Also reflecting on the campaign that was led by Save Lamu and the community in Lamu and how they were able to push back a coal project that was going to result into risk against the pristine and very and basically the ecosystem within Lamu reveals why it's important for us to preserve the democracy, but also the agency for that communities need to push back. And so an arrangement such as this will not be able to support us to achieve the kind of transition that we need, but also recognizing the shrinking policy space that comes with some of these legal frameworks. We know that from the experience that the global north, the European countries that have been party to the Energy Charter Treaty and being unable to get out of this particular treaty. An example is Italy and how it struggled to actually get out, but also live with the implications of actually getting out of the Energy Charter Treaty, then presents fears and questions as to whether it's actually imperative for us as poor countries, as developing countries, as countries that are constantly seeking for indirect investments to be able to exploit our various resources. We also know that the ECT in itself could undermine efforts to make renewable energy more affordable. Because thinking about some of the experiences we have been through, for instance, privatization of our energy system. And for example, if I give an example of Uganda, our electricity, hydroelectricity power systems were privatized. And this has resulted into higher costs of electricity, locking us into this privatization. So then it makes it difficult for us to be able to transition into more renewable energy because the ECT gives foreign investors leverage to decide on what kind of energy resources they should invest in. A government cannot be able to freely dictate on the kind of resources that they should invest in. We also see how, for instance, the East African crude oil pipeline is already presenting a number of challenges, and the focus for the investors is really on return on investment. And yet when we talk about, for instance, financing climate action, financing climate justice, it can't be about return on investment. It should really focus on return on justice, return on social justice, return on sustainable development, and ensuring that we're able to achieve a just transition. So I think I'll just stop there and hand back to you, Lynn. Thank you very much.
No, that's brilliant, Faith, and I think it is important as well. It's even when you're saying about the democracy, but also community power and engagement to be able to decide what happens with their ecosystems, but also that important point that this treaty also covers renewable energy. And one of the things that's was in, I think, the Jacobin today, even around the EU plans to develop green hydrogen in North Africa and places like that. So it is the renewables come, while they're better than fossil fuels, there's still that argument around communities deciding, community ownership, but also the democracy argument. So I think it's really important. I'm going to open it up. If people have questions, they can put them into the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on it there as it's coming in. So I know somebody there is asking just I'll just move down, scroll down onto that. I know someone is saying if Predator LNG is an Irish company, could it not challenge Ireland under the ECT as New Fortress Energy could? Cecilia, I suppose if you want to, maybe we'll have a talk about the different companies. So it has to be a foreign investor, but it can be a mixed investor. So if there's one foreign shareholder in an Irish company, am I right in saying that then they're eligible to access the provisions under the ISDS? Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So that's one characteristic of investment protection treaties. It's for foreign investors, not for national investors. But the way that companies are structured has allowed for, like even many of the cases, let's say under the ACT, are what it's called mailbox companies. So a very famous example is a millionaire from Spain that is suing the Spanish government, and normally that couldn't happen, but he set up a mailbox company in Luxembourg, and through that mailbox company, so mailbox company is a company that it only exists, with an address, but it has no employees, and so it's really a phantom company in a way, that he could use the ECT to sue the Spanish government in that way. So you would have to see exactly how the company is structured, but there is possibility for Irish companies to sue if they would be structured in a way that they have a base in another ECT member.
And the Spanish case is really interesting, and I know their Attracta is just talking about Ireland's plans now to expand our offshore wind energy. One of the things that's interesting is Spain is the most litigated against country as a party to the Energy Charter Treaty. I had, when I did my master's, 48 cases. I think that might have even increased, but they're mostly from renewable energy firms, and it's that they changed the tariffs that were being paid to renewable energy companies at a time when the country was going through a financial crash. And you had the EU telling the Spanish government that they needed to reform the tariff system. And at the same time, then they were being sued for changing the tariff system because the renewable energy companies were told that they had a legitimate expectation to the profits that they were being told they would be getting in the renewable tariff. So it's really important, I think, for people, while we're all interested around the fossil fuel lock-in, this is a treaty that will also protect multinational corporations that own renewable energy. And it's an important point being made by Attracta there, just that we're expanding our renewable energy right now at a scale that hasn't been seen before, while being exposed to ISDS. There's another case question there.
Go ahead. Come in really quickly on the Predator thing. Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because So Predator have set up a new company called Magmel Limited to explore the Cork LNG terminal, and they're actually, I was looking at their website just there, even though they're called, it's Magmel Ireland, Predator Ireland, they're headquartered in Jersey, so they're headquartered in the UK. So they've managed to circumvent that already, and even when it comes to the whatever venture it's going to be under the auspices of, they said they've contracted a vessel from Norway. So yeah, you're right. It does sound, actually, I'm glad you raised that, because it meant I looked into it a bit there, and yeah, so they could absolutely they could sue under ISDS as well.
And I think Jesse was just asking about what point the protections kick in, and I might defer to yourself, Cecilia, on this, but my understanding is they're not covered under pre-establishment, so the planning application would count as that, but it's once they get that planning permission and are then established. But you might want to come in on that one just while I'm going through some of the other questions there.
Sure. No, yeah, that's a very interesting and relevant question, because indeed the companies gained these rights very early on in the process. So just having the even not an actual permit, but the word from some officials that they will get a permit could be enough to consider that they had a legitimate expectation to an investment, and they could use that to sue. Of course, they need to have something in paper, but investors that got a letter from the government saying that they would be happy to have that investment or something along those lines could even be enough. But there are many cases where companies have not actually made any investment. They only had for example, mining companies. This is very common in the case of mining companies that had just an initial permit, but they still had to submit, for example, environmental assessments and so on. And for different reasons, that got stalled and didn't happen. And then the governments decided to withdraw those permits, and that has led to lawsuits and lawsuits that have been won by the investors. So it's very early on, let's say, that they gained these rights.
And I might just as well tease out, because one of the things we hear in defense of these, not just the Energy Charter Treaty, but certainly we've heard with CETA and TTIP, is that, a member state's right to regulate, and that the right to regulate is protected. And it is, but it's the cost of that regulation. And I think that the Dutch case is very interesting, because there's parallels with the Irish example of the LNG and what we're going through at the moment around energy security. So I think it was in 2006, the Dutch invited in coal-fired power plants because they had an issue with the cost of energy. And they wanted to diversify. And then, of course, on the back of the Urgenda case, when the Dutch government lost the case and were told they had to do more on climate action, they then looked at their coal power plants and wanted to shut them down. And the argument is that, yes, you can shut down your coal power plants early before their contracts are up, but it's going to cost you. And I think in the case of the Dutch, the two companies that are taking it, it's up to 2.4 billion could be the compensation costs. So when we're looking at Ireland now and this need to have gas power plants to feed the demand of the data centres, or to have the LNG to give us so-called energy security and diversify our mix, we're very much in that situation where the Dutch, where you're doing something that's a short to mid-term fix, but you're going to be on the hook for the very long term. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Well, you probably are, Cecilia, with that Dutch case and just that example, which we've repeatedly brought up at the Climate Committee, because of the parallels with Ireland.
Yeah, just to say that indeed that's the case, and even in the current modernization process, similar to the CETA agreement, there is this clause, the right to regulate, and this is what also the European Commission keeps presenting as, we have now a clause that explicitly says governments have the right to regulate. But this is as you said, yes, the right to regulate is there, and it's always been there, because these treaties don't forbid that governments regulate, but it's what happens when they do. That's the problem. And they get sued, and they get sued for millions and billions, and nothing in that article will prevent investors from continue suing. So it's a nice rhetoric to have that clause in, but it in no way it prevents investors from continue suing states. If they would have wanted to do that, they would have explicitly said investors cannot sue when governments regulate in the interest of da 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 da, like they did specifically, for example, in the case of state aid. So in that case, particularly, they did say very specifically investors cannot sue in this case, but they haven't done that for other issues. So it's it's not going to stop investors from suing.
Okay, and maybe just, I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but maybe Faith, if you just, like, is there much knowledge in the Global South around the threats and risks of the Energy Charter Treaty? Is there much of a campaign at the moment regarding it? Because certainly in Ireland, there's very little knowledge, and it's only starting to come into people's minds about the exposure we have as a country being a party to it. But you're in the situation where you're trying to prevent people from joining and becoming part. Is there much of a campaign, or is it being overruled by governments in their accession talks?
Yes, and I think that's a very important question that you asked over there. I think one of the challenges we have is that when it comes to trade and investment treaties, they're usually a privy of the state and sometimes a few private sector. So then it becomes a challenge in terms of even being able to mobilize stakeholders to engage, because then government is usually addressing this as a diplomatic issue and trying to limit any possible sabotage of the process. But I think one of the things that's encouraging is that now, because of its increasing connection to the climate justice campaign, there are a number of climate justice groups that are now talking about it. They've also started to write about it. And I think this then presents a light at the end of the tunnel, that then when we start to connect it to the real issues that that are troubling us, and connecting it to the issues that communities, that indigenous groups, that women are talking about, that then there will be stronger citizen agency to push back and challenge government and hold them accountable. Yeah, so challenge.
The battle continues.
That we face is that most of. Beg your pardon?
Sorry, no, I said the battle continues. I think we might have just lost you there for a second. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I think one of the things that I wanted to add is that when it comes to the analysis around the ECT, I think one of the challenges we face is that there is limited connection to our lived experiences as African people. Because, for instance, when you talk about renewable energy and the fact that it's provided for, and the fact that, again, that already presents challenges, I think one of the things that has also remained clear to us is that most of the investors that come here in Africa to invest in energy are still more skewed towards investing in fossil fuels and investment and basically energy resources that offer a long-term kind of return. So the issue of return on investment is one of those things. And so you find that, for instance, investment in solar, because a household will buy a solar panel and use it for so many years, then, and we also know how cheap solar is, then it is not exactly a competitive or an attractive kind of investment. So it's the governments that are making efforts to invest in renewable resources, while foreign investors coming in would rather rush for fossil fuels, investing in fossil fuels. And so then that presents a challenge, because if governments can't be able to regulate and direct energy investments into investing in renewable energy resources, then our transition is threatened. The rate at which we will be able to transition is threatened. Also, we can't forget technology. The fact that there is limitation in terms of access to technology also presents a challenge in itself, because most of the technology that we are getting here in Africa is technology that is also largely skewed towards, that is mostly run by fossil fuels. And so then that also presents a different challenge altogether. But I think it's important for us to continue pushing back and ensuring that there are reforms that happen, because as I indicated, for us to be able to achieve the Paris Agreement ideas, we will need a radical change. We need to be able to reimagine the ways in which we operate and center those that are most affected, even when they are not contributing the largest to contributing to the climate crisis. Thank you. You're muted, Lynn.
Sorry. Thank you. Thanks, Faith. No, I was just saying, just before we wrap up, I like to leave these meetings with giving anybody who's taken the time to participate with a job of work afterwards and an action to do. And I know Aideen has put in the link around the Not Here, Not Anywhere, No LNG campaign, but also just to I suppose to Cecilia and that idea, like, you know, Ireland could wait it out and see if there's going to be a EU on a block withdrawal, or, you know, should we be at least putting pressure on the Irish government to now, at this point, consider, or say even just the deadline of June 2022, to consider walking away unilaterally from the Energy Charter Treaty. So I might just leave you with the action to people. What do you think, in your opinion, would be the best approach for those of us who are concerned around this treaty, to wait it out or to call for that unilateral exit?
Should I come in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking there is like, you know, giving a chance for the coordinated exit is good. But if that doesn't happen, I think moving on individually, it's, you know, it's still a very valid option for two reasons. First, because as I said, from the moment that you leave, no new investments will get the coverage, but also because if eventually other countries, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years later, decide to take that more coordinated action, the country that left earlier could always join in. So I don't see a deterrent or you know, it will be damaging in any way to actually leave alone. It would be better to leave coordinated, because that then could cancel out this sunset clause. But I would say, you know, better not to wait too long either, and just really push for withdrawal one way or another. The sooner the better. And then one last word on, you know, the coming battle from now until June will be really on whether this modernization is considered or not enough to make this treaty Paris compatible. And I think we are going to see a lot of efforts, you know, to create a narrative that this is, and this makes it, you know, a good agreement to keep maintaining. And I think we will need to be very vigilant and contrast this, you know, with what climate scientists are saying. And yeah, just to unpack what's really there, because in our opinion, it is really not going to change any of the fundamentals, and it will mean maintaining an outdated and dangerous treaty for who knows how many more years. And it will also justify reopening the expansion, because that's the other part of the story. The expansion has been put on hold until the modernization finishes. But the moment that there is a modernization agreement, you know, all the countries that are on the line to join, will be allowed to join in. So it's also dangerous in that regard.
To get the EU to leave the ECT, there's a petition link there in the chat box as well. And I know Faith was just saying about the UN's role in bringing this treaty down. I think a lot of the EU's proposals around ISDS, they're hoping are going to be dealt with at the UN level, which is not going anywhere either, is my understanding in the negotiations of trying to reform ISDS outside of the Energy Charter Treaty. But that might be a whole other seminar on ISDS and where that needs to go. But I would just like to thank everybody for their contributions tonight, for giving up their time, and look, if you're more interested in, if you want more information on this, I'm happy to share any of the documents that I have, and with the other speakers as well, we can send on some of their research reading, and you can find out more. But thank you for giving your time up on a Monday evening, and I hope people found it informative.